Well, poverty continues to plague America as poverty rates remain stuck at record levels. This reality confirmed by a census report released yesterday. It shows 15% of the U.S. population living in poverty. More than 46 million Americans live below the poverty line, and 1 in 5 children live in poverty. And with that rate we just saw, it's stuck at what it was the year before. So it didn't get worse, but it didn't get better. It remains historically high. Meanwhile, the income inequality gap is growing. This is based on the Gini Index, which measures household income inequality. It ranges from 0, which means total equality, to 100, which represents total inequality. In 2011, it reached a record high of 47.7%. Here now to talk about what this means for the nation, a duo very outspoken about these issues. We'll also dive into other pressing topics facing the U.S. today. Cornel and Tavis Smiley join us now. Welcome, gentlemen, to the both of you. Great to have you here.
Thank you.
So first, want to start off, President Obama, he has repeatedly said it. It could have been worse. And we just saw those figures there stuck at these record highs. Should we just be thankful that it's not worse? I mean, it didn't necessarily get better, but it didn't get worse.
No, I think that these levels are a national shame and a moral disgrace. And I think we've got to accent a fight back that says that we're going to come up with ways in which the oligarchs who have disproportionate amount of power, I think we've got to be against oligarchs anywhere they are in the world, have a disproportionate amount of power, need to be accountable to make sure that poor people, especially poor children of all colors, can live lives of decency and dignity.
All right, we have President Obama. He has been dubbed the food stamp president by Republicans. Do you think that he's done enough to address the issue of poverty in the U.S.?
I think he's done very little other than the health care bill. That is about it. No major speech, no major focus, no major highlight of the issues of poverty. And that's one reason why we're on this poverty tour, to make sure that in America there's a call of conscience and says that we are going to have massive investment in jobs with a living wage and decent housing, decent education.
I want to ask, I guess, the same question to you. What do you think about President Obama's track record in terms of dealing with poverty?
It certainly could be a lot better. When he ran 4 years ago for the White House, he said then that he wanted to eradicate poverty in America. Not enough done since then. He said that he wanted to raise the minimum wage to $9.50 an hour. In this country, we have a minimum wage, but not a living wage, and that we should be much further along in that fight. Congress right now ought to be taking up a bill to raise the minimum wage. But when you suggested earlier that these numbers have not gotten worse, I'm glad you came to the second part of that study, because what we do know is that the gap between those at the top and those at the bottom is widening. As we say in our book title, The Rich and the Rest of Us, the gap between the have-gots and the have-nots continues to widen. But it's not even just these poverty numbers this week. It's the job numbers on top of that from last week that were dismal. It's on top of that the report from the Agriculture Department that said the other day that tonight in this country, the richest nation in the world, 50 million people will go to bed hungry, 9 million of them children. On top of that, it's a report from the Capital Kids Foundation here in the nation's capital that finds that child poverty in Washington, the nation's capital, is worse than in Mexico. The point is, the data keeps coming at us day in and day out that poverty is the new American norm. It's threatening our democracy. It's a matter of national security. So by any indice, one has to understand that poverty is a major problem that we've got to get addressed in this country.
And we are in an election year. What can the candidates focus on to help this problem of poverty in the U.S. and prevent this gap, this income inequality gap, from widening?
Well, we've got to make sure that they hit the issue of poverty head on, talk about it. It's fairly clear Mitt Romney, very much a right-wing candidate, very much open to wealth inequality increasing, decreasing taxes on the well-to-do. But we got to put pressure on Obama. And we've got to create a social movement. We need organized and mobilized people, some of whom are willing to hit the streets and go to jail to bear witness to the plight of poor people so that it reshapes the public conversation.
And we see just how serious, with these numbers coming out, proving how serious and pervasive the problem of poverty in the U.S. really is. Do you think that this is discussed enough in the media?
Oh, hardly, not at all. Not at all. In fact, Tavis is one of the few advocates in the mass media who hits this head on. And, of course, the debate's coming up.
That's a key issue. We have these 4 debates coming up, of course, 3 presidential, as you know, 1 vice presidential. Let's back up right quick to 2008 when Obama ran the first time. He and John McCain had 3 presidential debates. In those 3 debates, the word poor or poverty did not come up one time. This is the guy who wants to be the leader of the free world. Not mentioning of the word, not one time. Obama didn't raise it, McCain didn't raise it, the moderators didn't ask about it. So fast forward 4 years, 2 of those moderators from 4 years ago are back on the debate stage this time. But look how much worse poverty in this country is. So that the moderators in these debates, Mr. Lehrer, Ms. Crowley, Ms. Raddatz, Mr. Schieffer, have got to put this issue of poverty front and center, and the American people can push them, since they're representing us essentially, to raise this issue of poverty. Mr. Romney and Mr. Obama need to have at it over the issue of poverty and what they each are going to do about it, but that only happens if those moderators push that issue and if those of us in the media get less concerned about covering the horse race, as it were, and more concerned about talking about the issues that ought to be discussed in this horse race.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring up the horse race. I think it's more apparent, especially in an election year with he said, she said, whoever said what. But why don't you think that it's a very important issue? Why isn't it discussed more?
Simple reason. The poor do not vote at the same level as the elite. The poor don't make big campaign contributions. The poor don't have lobbyists up and down K Street here in Washington defending their point of view. And the poor, as a result, end up being rendered invisible because both parties are owned by big money, big business, big banks. So that doesn't leave much room for poor people to express themselves. So you got to get out on a poverty tour and beat the drum, ring the bell, pick your metaphor to try to get people to pay attention to this issue. And so that's why we're out here trying to get this issue boosted higher on the American agenda, because the media won't talk about it the way they should.
So you're essentially saying that poor people don't matter to politicians because they don't necessarily help them get reelected.
But then the question is, why is it that poor people don't matter to corporate media? Or is it that corporate media itself is too intimate with big money, big banks, and big corporations? Now, thank God that we've got alternative voices in the American media, this brother Amy Goodman and others, but not enough.
Very interesting. Connecting the dots there, Dr. West. Speaking of what is being covered, what is getting a lot of hype right now, the unveiling of the iPhone 5. And wanted to kind of bring that into the conversation here, because we're seeing more and more people getting a hold of these devices that make your life more easier. You know, I have a 13-year-old cousin that has an iPhone. I could imagine having one. I mean, being able to help you research and navigate and do things a lot more easily. And we have this population where it's becoming mainstream for them to get a hold of this kind of technology. And we have those that simply cannot get a hold of this technology. And I mean, what do you think that does? I mean, when we have a technology gap, is it ultimately perpetuating this inequality gap?
Well, it tends to, but for me, I'm much more concerned about the quality of the persons who are using the technology. If you get the technology and you want to read Chekhov, if you get the technology and want to listen to Duke Ellington, if you want to be informed by alternative voices, that can be a beautiful thing. The sad thing is the superficiality of the culture is reflected in the superficial choices that people make given the technology that they have. And so in that regard, you need something internal, you need something inside of one, and that has to do with courage and vision and discipline and sacrifice.
And everybody has access to these phones nowadays. If they can't afford an iPhone 5, everybody has something that they're using. The real problem, though, is, in addition to what Dr. West just said brilliantly, is that this technology boom has not made black folk wealthy. It's not made Hispanics wealthy. It's not made, so the point is there's still the same particular group and class of people who become billionaires off of this technology. Now, I'm not begrudging anybody who comes up with a good idea making a bunch of money. All I'm suggesting is that this technological revolution that somebody told us was going to, to level the playing field in this country hasn't done exactly that as yet.
I do want to shift the conversation a little bit, Dr. West. I know you've been an outspoken opponent of this stop and frisk program in the NYPD. I believe you even got arrested because of it. A lot of people saying that this program is racially motivated. I know that you scored somewhat of victory getting a court date in this. I mean, are you confident that policies like this, I know that this is a fight that you're fighting, it can be done away with?
Well, we had a week-long trial. We had a guilty verdict. We had already gone to jail, so that covered the time spent there in jail. But most importantly, right now, there's got 10,000 whistles being blown in New York City, all across the 5 boroughs, focusing on this arbitrary police power against young people, no matter what color, but they're disproportionately black and brown. There's been a 34% decrease in stop and frisk because of the pressures that we've brought to bear, again, going to the streets and going to jail. And I think this social action and this social motion and movement more and more is making the difference because of the political paralysis that we're experiencing. It has to do with prison industrial complex, mass incarceration, jobs, Chicago, very important, our solidarity with the teachers there against the city. All of these are forms of fight back that we're highlighting.
Really interesting, and really appreciate you both coming into the studio. That was Dr. Cornel West and Tavis Smiley, authors of The Rich and the Rest of Us, a Poverty Manifesto.